We'll start with a quote from a guy called Rabbi Dr. Nelson Buick. This guy said that it may be stated categorically that no archaeological discovery has ever controverted a biblical reference. Now, that's quite a big statement to make, especially when you consider this guy is liberal. He is not what you would call a hardcore, Bible follower in terms of New Testament. But his statement goes on to say, scores of archaeological findings have been made which confirm in clear outline or in exact detail historical statements in the Bible. We should be very clear before we start that biblical archaeology is actually a relatively new field. It only really began in the second half of the 19th century, so the 1800s. It's only when we really start looking into these things. Yet within a few decades of this happening, the number of finds that confirmed biblical accounts was absolutely overwhelming and flew in the face of popular skepticism at the time. By the time we hit the early 20th century, so many finds continued to bear on the biblical account that the Bible is confirmed by every turn of the spade became a popular catchphrase amongst the archaeologists. The track record of biblical archaeology baffled and continues to baffle those convinced that eventually archaeology will prove the Bible to be false. One of these people is a guy called James Agresti, who was an aerospace engineer, and in his book Rational Conclusions describes being 25 years old, an atheist, and was determined to study and find the errors in the Bible. What he encountered absolutely surprised him, and by the time he was finished, he was persuaded that the Bible is true. One of the main reasons for his about turn was that he recognized that the archaeological record spoke. He said, I have yet to encounter archaeological evidence that shows any part of the Bible to be inaccurate. Now, there's some things we can expect to find when we dig into archaeology, and that is a deliberate term. But there's some stuff you want to share. I just want to say at the offer, we say history is written by the winners. That might be very true. People who make records will also get to write the story. But after enough time, archaeology really is the job of unpacking the story. In fact, the only reason we say archaeology is written by the winners is when we do real history, we find out the truth. So real history is written in the stones. And stones don't lie. So you want to share just a minute at the start?
Yes, I think it's a fascinating subject, and it's something that we've got to be very careful about. And I think it's fair to say one of the things that Christians must be very careful about is never to exaggerate. And the reason I say that is there's an awful lot of people out there who publish things who perhaps don't have the credibility and sometimes state things that go far too far. And because of that, it brings the idea of biblical archaeology sometimes into disrepute. So, there was a very famous guy who did loads of apparent expeditions onto Mount Ararat, who even claimed that he'd found chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea, and absolute nonsense. I mean, literally a con man. But, sometimes these things flourish within Christianity because people want to believe those things. Oh, this was a long time before that, but now, yeah, I mean, dear me now. I mean, so, whereas we want to study Bible archaeology and we want to find truth, but at the same time we've got to be very careful that we, deal with it appropriately, if that makes sense. I think if I can just pick up what you said about Bible archaeology came into its own, let's say 1850, from around then. The great grand tour that all the posh people used to do as they toured around Europe and then went further and further around the Middle East and brought back things from Egypt, and suddenly, people started questioning what could we find in the Holy Land. But then, of course, after World War I, Palestine, as it was called, became part of the British Protectorate. So at that point, loads of the universities started ploughing into huge amounts of digs because we controlled it, the Brits. And then, of course, after 1947, Israel took charge of its own land. And at that point, they also took charge of how digs were conducted. And the mood changed, because you must remember that, again, sometimes people don't want to acknowledge it, but Israel is by and large a secular society. And certainly by the 1960s, although the term biblical archaeology is used, in Israel it's referred to as Israeli history, and Israelite archaeology, not biblical. And you have some very famous Jewish archaeologists who will say categorically that Moses didn't exist, that the tribes of Israel didn't exist. List as long as your arm, So be aware that what we think of as biblical archaeology now, including the Bible Archaeology magazine, is by and large a secular piece who will doubt biblical stories all the way through. Having said that, the wonderful thing is the finds that are coming out of late have been absolutely remarkable, and have helped me, certainly in my faith, because I have seen nothing that counter the biblical narrative. Everything that you see supports it. But there are arguments, and that's important to get that.
Yeah.
I'll pick one because you'll probably come across it if you start reading. Catherine Kenyon did the major work on the digs in Jericho. And she said, because she found Minoan pottery in Jericho, I might be wrong, I think it was Minoan, that because of that, the biblical account couldn't be correct. Because the walls came down, yes, but they didn't come down at the time that the Bible says. Now, of course, you can completely counter that the other way, and it's a good conversation at some point to have. But be aware, for every time a Christian says, this supports the Bible, there will be somebody on the other side that says, no, it doesn't. The best illustration, and with this I'll pass straight back to you, is imagine you find 5 pieces of a jigsaw in a town as you dig. You put those 5 pieces, you've got no chance whatsoever of making that puzzle work. You haven't a clue what is on it. You haven't a clue what it connects with. But if you had a picture of the box, you would know the size of the puzzle. But not only that, you would be able to look in the picture and see where those pieces match. And that's Bible archaeology as opposed to secular archaeology. The secular guy finds a ring and doesn't know how that fits in with anything else. The Bible archaeologist, if they can recognize it in the big picture of the scripture, knows exactly where it fits in relation to the other pieces. And so what you start with means how you interpret what you find.
Okay. So let's dig into it. What we're going to do is we pick one each that we really get excited about. And so we're all going to go through the ones that we picked. And then we may open up to some questions at the end. But bear in mind, we might not be able to answer the questions on the fly because this is all research. Having said that, we might inform us as to what we want to do next time. So have some questions on standby. We'll do a bit of back and forth on each one as well. If you want clarification on anything, hold on. say holler and holler out. And just for the slides briefly, we're skipping to I think it's 18, we're skipping to the Hittites now. Maybe it's 19.
Oh, sorry.
What's your presentation? Okay, right. So we're skipping to the Hittites. That's the one we're going to start with. This is the one that really sparked up my interest. I found this an absolutely fascinating story. The discovery of the Hittites is absolutely remarkable. They were a people that were forgotten by world history. Yet in Scripture, we're told they had a vast empire, that they were a powerful people. But the only place up until recent times that you ever read about them, the only place that ever talked about them, was in the Bible. As a result of this, a lot of people considered the Hittites to be fictitious, that they didn't exist, the Bible made them up, that they were a creation in Jewish scriptures, and was often used as evidence that the Bible cannot be totally true. So people would often cite the Hittites as a reason for that. There was an Oxford professor called Francis Newman, and he refers to the Bible's references of the Hittites as unhistorical, not exhibiting the writer's acquaintance with the times in a very favourable light. So he said, whoever wrote this knew nothing about ancient history and made it up. The problem is the Bible mentions the Hittites about 60 times and implies that it was a significant civilization of the time. So why is there no record of them anywhere else? How can a huge civilization just vanish without trace? But yes, they did. Today, our understanding of the Hittites has changed absolutely dramatically, thanks to some large-scale excavations, some well-known discoveries, and some chance finds. And now we understand how the Hittites, now we understand how the Hittites actually do closely resemble what we read in the Bible. And so I said mentioned a lot in the Bible. The very first mention of the scripture comes in Genesis 23, when Abraham purchases what's known as the Cave of the Patriarchs from a Hittite man. There in that old city of Hebron, in what is now in the West Bank of Israel, is where Abraham is buried, Sarah is buried, and it is one of the most sacred sites of Judaism. And he bought that from a Hittite. The Bible also says that the grandson of Abraham and Sarah, Esau, married two pagan Hittite women, even though his parents disapproved. Although, no Esau? Because his parents disapproved. And there's also an account in this similar to Mary. If you read this, this is in 2 Kings 7, verse 6. For the Lord had made the army of the Syrians hear the sound of chariots and of horses, the sound of a great army, so that they said to one another, Behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come against us. So the Syrians hear this and think it's the Hittites and the Egyptians. They pair them together because both places were known to have big armies. We have the most famous Hittite in Scripture, I would say, would be Uriah the Hittite, who of course was the husband of Bathsheba and met an unfortunate end thanks to David's interest in Bathsheba. The interesting thing about Uriah the Hittite is he is listed as one of the mighty men of David. So this isn't just David betraying a random soldier. This is one of the guys who put him on the throne. Isn't that it? It just makes what David did. I mean, it was bad, but it makes it so much worse that it was one of his closest friends. And what I find fascinating as well is he was only Uriah the Hittite, which means the Hittites are still a people here in David's kingdom, and you can trace them all the way back in that case when Abraham bought the cave. They were a civilization that had lasted at least from Abraham to David. That's a significant amount of time. 1,000 years, there we go. So where did they go? Why is there no mention of them? Well, for this extraordinary story of their rediscovery and entry into history, we start with a very eccentric guy named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. That's him. When you think eccentric, he is not from the Far East. He is Swiss. And he took very much seriously to go native when he visited a country, and they actually did convert to Islam eventually. He made a detour one time. He was exploring in 1812, and he was looking for the lost German explorer Ulrich Jasper Seetzen, who'd been looking for the lost city of Petra. So while he's looking for this guy, he happens upon Petra. This is the guy who discovered Petra. Now, if anyone's ever visited Petra, you don't just find it by accident. It is a really hard place to find, but this is the guy who discovered Petra, and that's the thing he's most famous for. But before he found Petra, he was traveling through northern Syria, and he found himself passing through a city called Hamath, and I'll give you a map of where Hamath is. And he spotted some black basalt stones in the foundation of the building. And on those stones was an inscription in a language nobody had ever seen before. We have a picture of that stone there. This was hieroglyphics nobody had ever seen before. And nobody knew what it meant. It's funny, I look at those, you remember it was the 80s when there was those subway paintings in New York. It's kind of the same sort of style, I don't know if you saw the idea. But nobody knew what it was, so they were confused by it. It resembled nothing ever found in Europe. And then they left it at that. Nobody knew what they were. They left it at that. It wasn't until 1834 that a French explorer called Charles Teessier was wandering around Turkey, looking for a lost Roman city called Tavium. Then he came to a village and inquired some locals if they knew of any ancient ruins nearby. So they took him to some hills overlooking the village. When he got there, he saw remnants of a civilization that was definitely not Roman. It was much older. And he came across some fortification walls and the style that was actually being discovered in Greece at the time. I think there's some pictures of those walls there. He discovered this wall and he started to follow it. The stones were huge. And he thought, where does this come from? And then further along, and he saw another wall. And he thought, how come nobody's found this before? He eventually came to a gate, and we have a picture of the gate where there's a relief of a helmeted figure. You see the helmeted figure on there? And that's, I think, a recreation of it, because I think it's crumbled since it was found. Holding an axe, wearing a helmet. Again, they've never seen helmets like these in any historical record. Then he went a little bit further, about a mile further down, and he came across a gate that was flanked by 2 stone lions. I think we have that gate as well. That one there, that's it. He had no idea what it was. And then he came across another relief, which had these figures inscribed on it. And all of them were wearing exactly the same peaked hats that was on the other one. All of them, unlike anything anybody had ever seen. He thought the writing was some kind of hieroglyphic, but he knew it wasn't Egyptian. So he walked the entire perimeter of the Great Wall, which he reckoned was about 3 miles, and had no idea what city this could have been. It would have been larger even than ancient Athens. It seems to have been tremendously significant, but it was lost to history. He knew someone lived here, someone who ruled here. But who? He had absolutely no idea. And he didn't actually publish his account until 30 years later, in 1862. But 1 year after he'd been there, a British diplomat called William Richard Hamilton stepped into the story. And this is the guy who recovered the Rosetta Stone. He didn't discover it, he recovered it. The French had it. Recovered might be an interesting way of saying mint. Yeah, I mean, and then in 1835, he was travelling through Turkey and he came across the same site. But a little bit further north, in a place called, oh dear me, I'm not even know how to pronounce that. He came upon a second city gate. Now this one had sphinx figures carved to either side of the gate. You see those there?
Yes.
He didn't publish this account until 1842. Both of them discovered the place separately within a year of each other, but didn't publish until later. Two accounts, both published independent and unaware of each other. When they were finally published, the French archaeologist Georges Pharoah thought, I'm going to travel there and see what this is all about. He then found something carved into a rock face in this city, and that the local terms called Nishan Tash. And you can see a picture of this. Is it covered up with what's called a pressing. So what they did is it was a kind of like when you squeeze, you put paper in water. What do you call that? Papier mâché. It's like a papier mâché pressing, so that you can take a picture of the image of it. The locals called it Nissan Tash, but they didn't know what it said. Later still, there was two archaeologists called Hugo Winkler and Kurt Bittel, and they started really doing a lot of groundwork on this. And they were the ones who pieced together that this could be the Hittite Empire. Gradually they began to reach this consensus, but there was no real way of verifying whether these were the Hittites until 1906. They discovered a royal fortress in this city. This city is called Hatsua. And they discovered in the royal fortress something that you virtually never find in archaeology. They found a royal archive containing 10,000 inscribed clay tablets. 10,000 of them, all written in a language called Akkadian, which was like the diplomatic language of that time, which meant they could read them. And as they started to read them and as they started to research them, and they found that these were clay tablets that were a correspondence between the Hittite ruler and the Egyptian pharaoh. That location names were in the texts, they were readily identifiable, and they pointed to this city. They knew beyond a doubt at this point, these are the Hittites. They had this vast empire that nobody knew existed. And the actual ancient site is absolutely monumental. It's huge. I've got some pictures of it from above. That's the city there. I mean, it is, especially for the time, massive. It's got the actual city wall is about 5 miles round. At its peak, the city would have housed about 50,000 people. We have a couple more pictures of it. There's an artist's recreation of what it would have looked like at the time, which, as again, when you think of what Jerusalem was like at the time of Jesus, it wasn't this big. There's a bit of a wall, a fort that's been recreated there, and there's another bit of just on the sort of a hill. This is one of the military fortifications that is in part of it as well. And then we've got a map here. Now we can say how big the Hittite Empire was. And in that purple area on the map was the Hittite Empire. And as you can see, you compare that to the size of Egypt, it's pretty big. It's pretty big. Today, no serious archaeologist will ever deny the Hittites existed. But for thousands of years, the only place that there was evidence of them was in the Bible. The Bible was proven to be accurate, true, and the people who called it a fable, well, let's say they had to walk back a little bit on what they'd said.
archaeology caught up with what the Bible already knew was true. So that's the story of the Hittites. I find that absolutely fascinating. It's Turkey. It's the Turkey-Syrian border area. You can visit it. I have found pictures of people visiting it. Don't know if it's the best idea at the moment, because it's right on the Syrian border. But you can visit it, and there's loads of pictures available. It's a huge place, absolutely massive. And you think, even Athens wasn't that big. But here's the thing though, I don't think anyone's worked out what happened to it. It's a mystery. But the Bible knew they were there, because the Bible is an accurate record of what happened at the time.
The Armstrong Institute has been doing a lot of work and a lot of exhibition work on it in this last year. So if you want to look that up, Armstrong Institute of Archeology.
Yes, they've got a website. It's very good.
Very good indeed.
Very. So that is the Hittites. Any questions before we move on? No, that's cool. I like no questions. Okay, Alan, we're going to hand over to you now I'll let you introduce what you want to describe.
Okay. I want to talk about the Cyrus cylinder, which, I'll be quite honest, I had no idea about until I started digging and doing some research. And it... Well, it is archaeology. So. It's one of the most famous artifacts in Bible or biblical archaeology, the Cyrus cylinder. It's sometimes been hailed as the first declaration of human rights. As a copy of it resides in the headquarters of the United Nations.
We have a picture of it as well, I think, if you want to see what it looks like. There we go.
That's right. It doesn't necessarily look that amazing, but it's all the stuff that's written on it. More to the point, the Cyrus cylinder confirms the biblical claim that Cyrus allowed the Jewish people to return to Israel, to Jerusalem, when they'd been captured by the Babylonians. He allowed them to go back to their own homeland and to rebuild. And 19th century skeptics just laughed at that claim and said that's ridiculous. No king would allow captured people to return to their homes and rebuild their temples. That's just not the sort of thing that would happen. And of course the Bible did say that Cyrus the Great allowed them to go back and to rebuild. But the Cyrus cylinder, when it was found, confirms that this was indeed the policy of Cyrus the Great. So the Cyrus cylinder was discovered in 1879 in the ruins of Babylon by, if I can pronounce his name, Hormuzd Rassam. And strangely enough, he was an evangelical Christian, but he was a native Iraqi, born in 1826 in Mosul, across the Tigris River from the remains of ancient Nineveh. It's a baked clay cylinder. It measures 22.5 centimeters by 10 centimeters, and it's inscribed in the language that Luke referred to, the Akkadian cuneiform script. And it contains a general declaration by Cyrus the Great. And this is what Cyrus the Great said. It's almost...
And what we have as well, we have an inscript. We have the unfurled version. Someone's took an extra, a scan of it and laid it out. So that's what it looks like when it's unrolled.
Rolled out. Great. And this is what he said. I sent back to their places whose shrines had earlier become dilapidated, the gods who lived therein, and made permanent sanctuaries for them. I collected together all of their peoples and returned them to their settlements. I returned them unharmed to their cells in the sanctuaries that made them happy. May all the gods that I return to their sanctuaries every day before Bel and Nehu ask for a long life for me and mention my good deeds. So the inscription confirms Cyrus's general policy of returning exiles to their homes and allowing them to take their gods with them and rebuild their sanctuaries. Now, the Jewish people, of course, had no idols. Okay? So the articles that had been taken from the temple in Jerusalem were returned. And Cyrus's specific proclamation for the Jews is recorded in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. And this is what that passage of scripture says. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And Ezra further records that Cyrus the king also brought out all the vessels of the temple of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away and placed in the house of his gods. So that's basically pretty well it. The skeptics didn't believe that the Bible could possibly be true when it recorded all that. But then when the Cyrus cylinder was found, it confirmed that, and that's what it said on the cylinder.
Can we see a picture of it again? Is that okay? The picture of it. By the way, that's not how it's stored. It's actually stored flat. I just couldn't fit it on the screen.
That's right, yes.
But it's fascinating. This thing has existed and is now considered one of the earliest human rights documents when Israel were allowed to return back.
And I was quite amazed that they've even got a copy of that, or the declaration on it, in the United Nations.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Quite significant.
Has anybody got anything else to add to that one?
Just the fact that Cyrus, Cyrus, it had been prophesied, I understand, that a man named Cyrus would be the one who would return the captivity. He would return them.
Yeah.
Yes,
and after 70 years, Jeremiah said, you might as well, when they were in Babylon, they thought they were going to get out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it was, Jeremiah said, you might as well build houses and live in this place and pray for the peace of it, because you're going to be here for a long time.
And did he prophesy it was Cyrus who would...
He mentioned 70 years.
Right.
But prior to that, it was mentioned that a man named Cyrus would be the one who would free before Cyrus was ever born.
Yeah. The tricky thing for the Israelites in captivity is there was more than one Cyrus.
Yeah.
So when the first one came around, must have been, yes, it's time. But it was a different Cyrus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much, Alan. Question? It's clear. Yeah, so it wasn't unraveled to take that picture, it was scanned around. Yeah, they took a scan of it all the way around, and so that's how they were able to get the flattened version of it.
Cuneiform is like a little tool that you press into the clay. So you'd make a clay cylinder, and while it was still soft but not wet, you then tap the letters into it, and then it dries in the sun and becomes very hard and very durable.
This is one of the earliest forms of writing that's ever been found. Not this particular scroll, but I mean cuneiform. It goes back beyond papyrus, beyond paper, beyond anything else. Is some of the most ancient writings you'll ever find were written in cuneiform. And there's reason to think, we'll not get into this.
So what sort of size was it?
They're not huge.
No.
Not huge.
25.5 centimetres by 10.
Yeah. The good thing with clay is it's soft, so it's quite easy to make indents in. Unlike stone, where you have to go big, otherwise you get chunks. You've got to go big if you're doing it in stone. But clay is nice and soft, so you could get quite detailed writing on them.
We're talking symbols for words rather than alphabetic.
Yeah,
It isn't alphabetic it is an alphabetic script, but not a recognizable one to us now. It's obviously built on the wedge shapes that you put into it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's an alphabet. It's just not our alphabet, which didn't come around for a long time afterwards.
Egypt was using papyrus about the same time, mind. So
As
papyrus.
this,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm thinking that there's cuneiform that goes back even further
Yes,
than that. Not
indeed.
this one, but there's cuneiform that goes back a long way. A long way. Some of the earliest writing ever found is in cuneiform form. Is that right?
I think there are some papyri documents that are very, very old.
Okay. Well, it's a competition between cuneiform and papyrus. We'll find out which is the oldest. But either way, it just shows that, we often think it was just certain cultures that had writing with a papyrus, but actually mankind's been writing for a long time, and they've had ways of writing for a very long time, and written language has been a part of us for, well, longer than the history that we know. So, which is helpful, because that's how this language, what was the name of the language again?
Archeology.
The Akkadian language became this useful way that you could communicate across nations, in much the same way. I mean, in a modern form of that, I guess would be English now. Is it a language that most people would understand? Although French is also is officially the international language. It's French.
I've just found that passage, Luke, where Cyrus is mentioned. It's Isaiah chapter 45. It's the first 13 verses, but in particular the last verse, verse 13. And this is a prophecy from Isaiah. I have raised him up in righteousness. And he's talking about Cyrus all the way through. I've raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. He shall build my city, and let my exiles go free. Not for price nor reward, says the Lord of hosts.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Alan. That's great. Shannon, could you do me a favour? Could you select light number 5 and just turn it down a touch on the fader 5 on light 5? Let's see if that works. That's better. Thank you. I can see. Right. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Now, this one's going to be quite in depth. We're going to have a look at finding Moses and the Exodus, and over to David Taylor for this one.
Yeah, just on that writing, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because, in Egypt, the banks of the Nile is full of papyrus plants. So guess what? You're going to use papyrus. If you're in Mesopotamia, the land's completely flat. There's the riverbanks and there's mud everywhere. So, of course, you're going to use clay to make writing, And you're right, it's just that facet, isn't it, of human creativity. I thought what I'd do would go on a detective journey together. Are you okay for that? Yes? Good. So what I thought we'd do is, using the Bible, let's just see whether we can match times between Bible events and what we know of secular history. And I thought we'd try it with Moses. And by the end of this little bit, I hope to show you the face, the mummified remains of the Pharaoh of the Exodus and Moses' mummy.
When you say mummy, do you mean the mummy of Moses?
Nah, not the mummy of Moses. You'll see where we get to. So, it's... I'm quite stretched on this wire.
That's all the wire there is.
That's the wire. I'm going to move my chair slightly, if that's all right. So, when we go to 1 Kings chapter 6, it says, in the 4th year of Solomon, that it was the 480th anniversary of the Exodus from Egypt. You got that? So the Bible itself tells us how long had elapsed between Solomon and the Exodus itself. And his fourth year was 966 BC. And if you subtract the 480 years, you're going to get 1468 BC. Sorry, 1446 BC. Now, obviously, when you tally up the reigns of kings and the like, you know, if somebody reigns for 14 years, hey, there might be 14 years and 1 day. Somebody reigns for 14 years, it might be 14 years and 11 months. You with me? So you're going to get some slippage along the way. And if we do this again, what I'd love to do is tell you about a very famous eclipse that actually nails down to the exact moment that we can tally Bible chronology together. But that's not for tonight. So, just going forward. If we go to Egyptian history, what we find is that by and large there is the ancient kingdoms, the pre-dynastic, very early, oldest of dynasties. And then you come to the Middle Kingdom. And then you come to this intermediary period where there's this strange group called the Hyksos who either invade or come to dominate in Egypt. And then after that you get what's called the New Kingdom. And that's the area that we need to look at, because that's exactly where this date of Solomon is going to situate us. So, the New Kingdom. And then after that, you get the invasions by Babylon and Persia and all that. And then later you get Alexander the Great conquering, and after that you get the Ptolemies and the Cleopatras just before the time of Jesus. But we're going to go back now to the time of the New Kingdom. So if you want to have a little look at the map of Egypt, there's a couple of clues that we can pull from Scripture. And this map, I don't know how well you can see this, but basically you have the incredibly long kingdom of Egypt. So you've got the Delta period at the top, and then you continue going right down, and at the bottom where the river curls around in Upper Egypt, you have Thebes. And Thebes was once the capital of Egypt, but it also had a capital further up near the Delta in Memphis.
Can I just ask, obviously that map, Egypt looks very thin.
Yes.
Is that the kingdom itself?
Yeah, I mean, you can almost see one side of Egypt to the other. I mean, that's an exaggeration. But it only really functions in the middle of the desert on either side of the river. And that's so the Nile just cuts right through the whole thousands of miles, and Egypt is just literally a city's worth on either side of the bank.
And Egypt's not too much different from that today.
No.
I don't know if anyone's ever been to Egypt. When you fly over it, desert, 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 green, desert, desert. And it's just around the Nile that there's anything alive, isn't it? And if you've been on a trip or something, you get off the Nile, you get on your bus, you travel for a couple of miles, and suddenly there's nothing. And that's what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why papyrus works for them. Thousands and thousands of miles of papyrus on either side of the bank. Now, when we start focusing on the children of Israel, when they first go to Egypt, we find that Joseph, it says, is given a priestess, Asenath, the daughter of the high priest of On, in Hierapolis, to marry. I'm sorry, I've got a very bad cold at the moment, and I know I'm not pronouncing things properly, so please forgive me. My head's like cotton wool. But here, Heliopolis, we know that where that is because it's on the delta, and if you look on the next slide, you'll see it. So that's right up on the delta at the top. You've got the city of Avaris, and then further down the bottom, you've got Heliopolis. Now, Avaris is where the land of Goshen is, and that's where the children of Israel settled. And later, Avaris is called Ramses, which again we'll look at in a moment. But it's quite important to understand that just below Heliopolis, where you see that other black just on the edge of the screen, is actually where Memphis is. Now, why is it important? Well, have you ever read the story of Moses and Pharaoh? Because what type of thing happens? Over and over again, Moses goes to Pharaoh, tells him what God says, goes back to his people. Pharaoh does what he does. Moses has to go back yet again. Now, if the capital of Egypt at that time was in Thebes, it would be months between every visit.
The Exodus would take 40 years just to get to through
it
the
would have
place.
taken 40 years to have the dialogue with Pharaoh going backwards and forwards. So clearly we find that Memphis has to be the place where the capital is. And we know that Joseph was given the daughter of the priest of Heliopolis. So we know that the children of Israel are probably based there, as well as down in Avaris as well. And that's a very short distance backwards and forwards between Memphis. And suddenly the story starts, to my mind at any rate, to really come alive. And then we find that it says in Genesis they built in Exodus, they built Pithom and Ramses as supply cities for Pharaoh. And then it says, so the Egyptians put slave drivers over them to crush their spirits with hard labor. And then also, it's worth pointing out that, as I say, Ramses is also called Avaris. Now, why does this become important? Well, because Ramses is named after one of the pharaohs.
Which one?
And so, nearly got me. One of the things a lot of people think, oh, well, that means Ramses is the pharaoh of the Exodus. No, it doesn't at all. And he's far too late. The Exodus happens earlier than that. So I just want to address that question of why the name of the city of a future pharaoh. Well, think of it like this. If we were talking about St. Cuthbert being carried in his coffin to Durham City, yeah? In our day and age, we would use the modern name for Durham. So if we were talking to anybody, we would say they carried the Cuthbert's coffin off to Durham. But if you talk to people at the time, they wouldn't know what you were talking about because it was called Dunelm. Yeah?
Like the mill.
In the same way that Newcastle, we talk about Newcastle, but nobody knows where it used to be called before the Newcastle was built. They know it was called Pontelius in Roman times, but nobody knows what it was called in medieval times. Jordanium. So, the fact that when they're writing in the book of Exodus, or the later editor uses the title of Ramses for the city name, that's because the readers at that time would have recognized what the name was. Okay, so let's move.
So the city was known as Avaris when the Exodus happened.
Yes.
And in later history, when they're writing, it's called Ramses.
Correct.
Okay.
So we've got some fascinating things from archaeology that we pull up. So, for example, if you want to see some Semitic slaves making bricks that the pharaoh demanded, I've got a picture for you. And you can see that they are clearly Semitic. It's interesting.
Are they the ones who are paler than the other ones? Or is that not? Not part of it.
Yeah, I think they did try to show the overseers in a different light.
Right.
But there's a lot of debate about the racial profile of the Egyptians of the time, and there's nothing to suggest, actually, although I know it's almost a heresy to say nowadays, but there's no evidence that the Egyptians really were black. So just for the record. Did you watch the thing on, I think it was Netflix, on Cleopatra, where the the start at the very beginning, and the professor says, "There's no evidence that Cleopatra was black, but my grandmother says she was, so I believe it." And that was the whole of the background on that. Anyway,
So this is from the time showing the Israelites making bricks.
and there's all sorts of other things. I can show you other things later on. But one of the interesting things is, if we're going to go back to find these who these pharaohs were, what I thought would be interesting to do was to look at one thing that's sometimes missed in the the Exodus account, and just pick up on it, and it tells us something very important, and that is the idea of the defeated Egyptian gods. So let me try and tell you what I mean. So it says, for example, in Exodus 12:12, "For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment." Have you got that? So God says he's not only making judgment against the Egyptians, but he's actually going to do it upon the Egyptian gods. And it says, "The Egyptians were burying all their firstborn whom the Lord had struck down. The Lord had also executed judgment on their gods." Right? So what I want you to understand is that the 10 plagues that come are actually warfare, not just judgments on the people, but it's warfare against the gods of the Egyptians. And each plague was designed to disarm one of the gods of the Egyptians in the Egyptian pantheon. And I can't spend too long on it, because honestly, you know what I'm like. You could wind me up, we'll be here in 4 hours and I'd still be talking about it. So
It's true.
I will go through. But the water turns to blood. There's frogs, there's lice, there's flies, there's livestock, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the killing of the firstborn. And that's interesting, because if you look at the gods of the Egyptians, you get these. Oops.
They put a background on that one.
I didn't put a background on, sorry about that. But basically, if you look at Heket, the second one along, she is a god with the head of a frog. The first one is the Nile, the flooding of the Nile. So the Nile is poisoned, if you like. That's the first one gone. The plague of frogs. You know? And if you go through each of them, the livestock, the darkness, each one in turn, until you come to Anubis, the god of death. The Ra, the sun god, and it goes black. Yeah? And you come to Anubis and the god of death. And suddenly you find that the judgment is incurred upon the Egyptian gods. So it's going to become important.
Does each one of the plagues represent one of those?
Yes.
Okay.
You can track right through. But what I thought you might know about and might find really interesting is there is a papyrus called the Ipuwer papyrus. And Ipuwer papyrus. And the Ipuwer papyrus is written by a guy called Ipuwer, and he's bemoaning having to live through terrible times. Now, this is one of those classic cases where it so matches the biblical account that it's almost impossible to discount it. But if you do talk to Egyptologists and archaeologists who are non-believers, they will give all sorts of arguments against it. So all I want to do really is point this out to you so that you can see it for yourselves.
Just, sorry, continue. Yeah.
Sorry?
Continue, sorry.
So on the scroll, 2:5-6 says, "Plague is throughout the land. Blood is everywhere. The river is blood. Men shrink from tasting. human beings and thirst after water. On the third, it says, "This is our water, this is our happiness. What shall we do in respect of all that is ruin?" So you can see how that matches the first plague. And then it says, "Gates, walls, and columns are consumed by fire. Lo, Egypt weeps, the entire palace is without its revenues. There isn't any wheat or barley or fish. Grains perished on every hand. The land is given over to weariness and the cutting of flax. All animals, their hearts weep, cattle mourn. Behold, the cattle are left astray. There's none to gather them together. The land is without light."
The land is without light.
Yep. "Forsooth, the children of princes are dashed against the walls. The children of princes are cast out in the street. The prisons are ruined." There's groaning throughout the land, mixed with lamentations. And then it says, "Behold, the fire has mounted up on high, and its burning goes forth against the enemies of the land." And of course, in Exodus, it talks about the pillar of cloud to lead the way and the pillar of fire by night. But this is an Egyptian, of course, speaking against that. Now,
so this papyrus,
yeah.
Is this just some obscure thing that we'll never see? Or is this,
No, this is very well known.
So where could we go see this?
I don't know where it is.
Okay.
I presume it's in Cairo Museum, but I don't know. I'll
The
check it out.
Ipua papyrus.
Yeah.
But that's worth something worth researching. Just in case anybody wants to corroborate what's been said there, that is, it exists. It's findable.
There's loads on it. Absolutely loads. But there's one other thing in it that I thought was absolutely fascinating. He says this: "Gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the necks of the female slaves." You got that? And of course, in Exodus it tells us that they requested from the Egyptians silver and gold articles. So actually, they used to dress their female slaves in jewelry. So it was part of the status to dress your female slave up in all this jewelry. Because it always seemed very strange, isn't it, that they're taking all this jewelry off the Egyptians. Yeah?
Yeah, it's almost like they did a raid before they left. But
it's not. It's the custom and practice of the Egyptians.
Right. Does it not say that they plundered the Egyptians?
Yes, but if because they walked off with it all, that's a pretty good plunder.
I guess it wasn't given to them when they were slaves. It was on a bit of a loan.
Yeah, but the other thing is the type of work that would be given when people were making bricks and building, it was more indentured labour than the way you think of slaves. These weren't kept in chains. There were whole cities where they had their own commerce and time off, and but they were indentured labourers, if you like. So what I want to do is take that idea of the death of the Egyptian gods, and we're going to go on this journey now to find the Pharaoh. So bear with me. Are you doing okay? Yep. Bang on.
Oh, put the next slide up. Go, Joanne.
And that is a statue of Akhenaten from the Aten Temple in Karnak. And Akhenaten is unique because he was the only pharaoh to abandon the gods of Egypt. He abandoned the worship of all the gods, and he worshipped just one, the sun, that they'd never worshipped before other than in the form of Ra, but he didn't do it as Ra, if you're with me. And it's interesting because there is an inscription, if you go to the next slide, there's an inscription at Karnak that records a speech by Akhenaten. And he says, "The temples of the gods are fallen to ruin, their bodies do not endure." So why did he adopt this worship of, some people trying, they're wrong, but some people have tried to say, maybe he was the forerunner of Moses, because he worshipped one God.
They've tried to say he invented monotheism.
Yeah, he didn't.
No.
All these gods were dead.
Yeah.
They were defeated. And the only thing he was left to worship was the sun. Yeah? So we can identify that he is...
Isn't it funny they chose the sun? That's one of those weird coincidences, eh?
So the next slide, there's a relief on Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, seated with their 3 daughters under the rays of Aten, Aten being the name that they give the sun. So he doesn't even use the word Ra, because Ra was one of the old gods. And that's at the Berlin Museum. And that is his, next one please, is his skull that is... was photographed in 1912 by Elliot Smith, very famous Egyptologist. He does have a funny-shaped head. The statue seems to suggest that as well. But because he's got a funny-shaped head, you can guess what that means, can't you?
Oh, I can will it hazard a guess what some people say.
Yeah, the ufologists say it was an alien.
Yeah.
But yeah. You can almost predict it, can't you? Now... He may have had. I'm struggling here. I don't think his mummy's preserved. It may be. If it is, it's included in the next slide or two. But just to go back to this, it was during the reign of Akhenaten that they found, or rather. They've since found that there were letters to Akhenaten from the people who lived in Canaan. Have you got that? And they were writing to Akhenaten, and they were saying, we need help. We've been overrun by this new army that's arrived called the Hebrew.
Did they come out of the wilderness by any chance?
They came out the wilderness. And there's 12 places, there's 12 letters, and some of these are in the British Museum. You can see them if you want. And in each of these, it names places that we have matched in the Bible of where the children of Israel fought and won the battles. So the people in Canaan are writing to Akhenaten. So guess what? We can date Akhenaten to exactly the time of the conquest.
40 years after the Exodus.
40 years after the Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
So we've now come to the end of the line, because we know who Akhenaten is. We know why he hasn't got the gods that he used to, his people had. And what's more, we can actually see the letters that were written and even read them. And so the Hebrew are invading. Can you go to that slide, please? So, the location of something called Tel Amani, that's it. So, bang between Memphis down to Thebes was a place called Tel Amani, and that is where they discovered tens of thousands of cuneiform clay tablets, and totally exciting cache of documents. And if you look at them, if you keep going, please.
There's some pictures of them there.
You'll find pictures of the tablets on display in the British Museum and also in the Louvre.
So are these the letters that say...
The Hebrew are attacking and we need help.
Help, we're being attacked. Someone's coming to get us. And you can see those in the British Museum.
Yeah. That one is... That letter, next one. That's letter 161, and it's from a guy called Aziru, who's the leader of the Amuru, which is the Amorites. And if we go again, please, you can even... Oh, you're not going to be able to see it, I guess. But if you want to have a look at this, I can make sure you've got a look at it if you want. So basically, you've got...
The bigger one has the list.
The bigger one
might
be better.
The full list on there.
Next one, please.
That's it.
Yeah. So there's actually there's 12 places mentioned in the letters, and I've got a complete match down of the biblical verse where those places are mentioned as where we were fighting. So, not being funny, you've got the names of the places mentioned, complain about a conquest by the Hebrew, and the same place names matching the biblical account. Well, I think that's a done deal, that one, isn't it?
I think it seems
It's very hard to argue against that particular thing.
microphone.
So he was the Pharaoh
Akhenaten.
that
They were writing to him
yeah. So
to say, send your chariots because we're being conquered.
so he was the Pharaoh that released the.
No,
He was.
he is the last of the
He's-
pharaohs that we're looking at.
Yeah.
He's 40 years after, so he's at the
Yeah.
time of moving into the land of Israel.
And then if you go to the next one, really important, what you find here is there's a small clay tablet found in 2009 by Elliot Mazar. I had somebody I know who worked with Mazar, and it was the excavations in Jerusalem's awful, and it was an archival copy of part of the Armoury correspondence. And for whatever reason, it shows evidence that it was burned in a fire. And of course, in Judges 1:8, it says towards the end of the conquest, the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it and smote it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. Of course, fire is the biggest asset for archaeology because it's the destruction layers where you find the riches
Yeah.
of history. That's where you find things. So this little tablet here is actually part of the evidence from Jerusalem itself that matches the Telemani cuneiform tablets and matches up, and it was found in 2009.
Okay. I'm going to have to speed you up a little bit, if that's okay.
Yes. Okay, let's go back then. So we've got Akhenaten. You're going to have to keep up on if you don't mind, guys.
Going back from Akhenaten. So we're going to go
Roll back,
backwards
please.
from Akhenaten. Okay, right.
Yeah. Can you roll back, please?
Back where? Sorry.
The next slide, please. Yeah, you're going to have to keep nimble-fingered. That's correct. So we've actually got the dates for Akhenaten. And then if we go before him, or rather, there is the statue that I've mentioned. And if we go before him, we come to Amenhotep III, and he is the pharaoh of Israel's wilderness years. He reigns for 40 years, and he is the guy...
He reigns for 40 years.
He does.
Up to the end of it. So
Before Akhenaten.
he takes over at the start of the wilderness years, as if the
Yes.
last pharaoh
Yes.
has... Something's happened to him.
Well, you'll come to
Okay,
that. You'll
okay.
come to
I'm
that
trying to
more.
get ahead.
So Amenhotep the third is the pharaoh of the wilderness years. And if we go, there's his mummified head that is on display. Yeah, I tell you what, he looks in better nick than me. If we go before him, we come to a guy called Thutmose IV. Now, what's interesting about Thutmose IV is he was never expected to rule because he was the second son. So why did he come to rule? Because the firstborn died. He was the spare. He only reigned for 9 years. So if you think about Akhenaten, then the one before him for 40 years, and then this 9 year. So the
A little bit of
overlap
leeway.
there. So
Yeah.
the reign of the one for 40 years starts a little bit into the wilderness years.
Yeah.
And then Akhenaten comes after that. And then if we go before him, or rather that's the mummy of Thutmose the fourth. If we come into Amenhotep II, this is the guy who, that's a statue that's in the Brooklyn Museum, but this is the pharaoh of the Exodus. And Amenhotep II, that's a steely boasting of his conquests. It's interesting, when you lose a battle and you're an Egyptian, you claim it's a victory. because no one's going to criticize you because nobody knows. Your army comes back from where they've been fighting and you go, yeah, guys, we won. And all the people go, yay, we won. And they wonder why you don't come back with an army.
So that's the stone tablet there. That's claiming
sure.
victory on something.
Indeed.
Okay.
And that is the mummy of the Pharaoh of the Exodus coming up next. And that is Amenhotep II. And if we go before him...
Isn't it weird looking at the face of someone?
Who you've
the
read
Bible.
about for years and years.
Not a picture, but the face.
The actual face. And Thutmose III was before him. He was the Pharaoh who reigned while Moses was in Midian. Thutmose III. There's his statue in the Luxor Museum. And the mummified head of Thutmose III, who grew up with Moses.
So he'd have been not brothers, but they'd have been grew up as brothers.
Yeah,
in a sense.
and importantly, you come next to somebody it has to be mentioned. So, please, yep. So we come to Hatshepsut, and she was probably 10-year-old when she saved Moses from the River Nile. Now, what's interesting about her, we know an awful lot about her. And although she was the Pharaoh's daughter, when her father died, the next one that should have reigned was just a baby. And she became co-ruler and then regent. And so, very, very important woman.
What's interesting about her, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in, you're probably going to say this. We went to her temple.
Yeah.
And all of the engravings of her, all of her face on her statues had been removed.
Yes.
Like Egypt was embarrassed about her and wanted to strike her from the record.
Because, well, what I'll say is if you want more of this, I think in history we can now locate who Moses was. And I think we can give him his first Egyptian name and the circumstance of his rise to power and how much power he had in Egypt for the first 40 years. And also, to bracket that, we can go probably further to find a statue dating from hundreds of years earlier that may well be Joseph.
We might do that one
So,
next time.
If you're interested. I was going to try and cram all
Yeah, we'll not do that now,
tonight.
but we'll move on now.
Yeah. But if you want to just hit the next one, sorry, go back.
Back another one?
Yeah, I think back another one.
That's Hatshepsut.
That's
Okay,
right.
Moses and mummy. Oh, I ruined that joke earlier.
You did ruin the
Yeah.
joke. I thought I'd just point out
I'm glad I
that
did.
I set that up and you blew it out the water.
I did. I'm sorry.
Thanks very much. Any questions?
Well, far be it from me to not do an obvious joke. So that was fascinating that we can actually look at the face of the Pharaoh of Egypt. That's fascinating.
And you may be able to look at the statue of Moses soon.
Question. These letters to the pharaohs and stuff, possibly replies, were they written by the pharaohs themselves or did they have scribes?
No, they would have had scribes, but the letters were to Akhenaten from the kings of Canaan.
So would the pharaohs have been literate or would someone have read them?
It's a good question. I would presume, from what I know, I think they were very, very literate. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. We're gonna
One
move
last
on
thing:
to-
if you're ever looking at somebody in Egyptian history in a carving, if they've got a beard, they're not Egyptian, because the Egyptians would shave, never had a beard, and you can find the Hebrews that way quite often. They used to have a fake beard on a stick.
Also, like they would go like this.
Yeah. No, this one's real. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on to our last one, and this is our wrap up. This is our only New Testament one for tonight, and it is also the newest discovery out of all the ones we're sharing as well. So over to you, Pastor Cliff.
Fascinating, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating. It's on. It's on. Wherever you walk in Israel, you walk on history. If you do dig down, and nowhere better than in Jerusalem. Tonight I want to talk about one of, as Luke's mentioned, one of the most recent archaeological discoveries. And there are hundreds of them, but I think this is one of the most recent. And I want to talk about the Pool of Siloam. I want to read a few verses from John chapter 9, where Jesus mentioned this pool. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. His disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had said these things, he spat on the ground. He made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and he washed, and he came back seeing. Therefore the neighbours and those who previously had seen him, that he was blind, said, is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he's like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus. He made clay, and he anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went, and I washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. For 2,000 years, the pool of Siloam was never discovered. And of course, it caused the skeptics to deny what we have just read about, that there was ever such a pool, because there had been no trace of it for 2,000 years. That was until Charles Warren, who was a British Army officer, an archaeologist and a photographer, in 1867, he discovered Hezekiah's tunnel. For those who we've walked through Hezekiah's tunnel, it's a fascinating piece of archaeology. Sennacherib had come, the Assyrians had come to invade. They'd invaded many of the nations round about, conquered them, and now they'd come to Israel, come to Jerusalem to conquer that. And Hezekiah, he built this tunnel from the Gihon spring that supplied the water into the city. And the tunnel is like an S shape, and they tell us that they started at one end and started at the other end, and they met directly in the middle. It takes about 45 minutes to walk through.
It does. Don't mishear that on the way in like I did. I was going in and I thought somebody said about 14 minutes. I thought I can cope with being in a tunnel underground for 14 minutes. It's 40 odd minutes, yeah.
But what it did, the Assyrians couldn't find the water. there was plenty of water inside of the city, and the Assyrians never conquered it. They went back. So that, but at the end of this tunnel, if you could put that photograph on again,
That's it.
they came out onto what they believed for 200 years was the pool of Siloam. My lasting memory of coming out of Hezekiah's tunnel, I've had the privilege of going to Israel. I think I've been about 14, 15 times. But the first time I went was about in 1980, 84, 85. And the second time I went, I took Paul Whittingham with me. We went on a leaders tour. And my lasting memory of Paul as I came out of the tunnel, Hezekiah's tunnel, you see those three, like, what do you call them in the water? Stepping stones or something. I saw Paul sitting on one of those, doing this with his eyes from the water. If you don't know, Paul's got very poor eyesight. He wears contact lenses. And I said, what in the world are you doing? He said, well, if Jesus healed a blind man here, he said, I believe he can touch my eyes.
Did he put mud in first?
No, he didn't put mud.
That's
just
where
water from the pool. I was trying to find the picture because I took a picture of him, but I couldn't find it. So the end of this tunnel leads out into a spring of water, and they thought they'd discovered the pool of Siloam. And for 200 years, pilgrims have thought that this was the pool of Siloam.
And it's important to say they thought that was it.
That was it.
It was not an impressive. I mean, you saw it there. It's not an impressive pool. So again, the skepticism was the Bible's inaccurate.
That's right. And so that was what they thought the pool of Siloam was. That was until 2004. And what they discovered in 2004 was totally by accident. They were mending a pipe, and as they dug down, they hit stone, lots of stone, which proved to be. Can you put the next slide on?
That's it. That's the stone there. Yeah.
Is that the stone?
That's the first. That's the 2004 excavation.
That's the 2004. They hit this stone leading down, and that's as much as they uncovered. And they believed that this could be the pool of Siloam. That's all you could see of it, those steps. Sorry?
There's the steps at the bottom there.
The steps are leading down.
And then they're like underneath that mud, and they're heading down.
Yeah. The land in between was, it belonged to the Greek Orthodox Church. It was their land. They wouldn't sell it. So it went no further. So after 2004, they uncovered these stones. We then were able to visit these stones that they'd uncovered. And in 2022, it must be the Israeli archaeology. They purchased the land off the Greek Orthodox Church, and they've started to uncover what is now known as the Pool of Siloam. Can you see right along? They've started to uncover that, but they've also uncovered much more than that. So in 2022, excavations started, and I don't know, can we see it as it is now? Or what the excavations are?
The video, yes.
So the video will show you this.
This shows you what it's like now.
That we've put together. This is the city of David. This is where David first came to when he came to Jerusalem. Remember, it was called the Jebusites? And they said they'll never take the city. And David through the Gihon spring. So there's the pool at the bottom. And can you see leading up?
Can you pause that and just go back a little bit? Is that okay? Just take us to that image. Sorry, it took us back to the start, but we'll just pause on that photograph.
Bit more. Bit more.
Oh no, play from there, and then when we get to the artistry creation, just hit pause. It's coming up. So let's not very soon. Hit pause there.
So, can you see this is the artist's impression of what it would have looked like, and so leading from that pool are steps going up, and those steps are going right up to the Temple Mount.
Okay, you can hit play again, and that should
where
pan
the
up.
temple was.
That's it. Temple's right up there, all the way. Oh, we cut off
It was
before.
called the Way of the Pilgrims. So now they're beginning to uncover the pool.
This is what it looks like now. As you can see, it is vast.
70, I think it's 70 metres, which is about 225 foot. It's the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools.
That's all that uncovered area is it. I haven't even got to the other side yet. I mean, it's massive.
Yeah.
And this was taken quite recently, this video. This is what it looks like pretty much now.
Yeah.
So that's 2023, that picture was taken.
If can you just pause it there? Another thing that they've just found out, I just discovered this at tea time, they thought there were steps all the way around the pool. And there's not steps all the way around. There's just steps, those steps that you see on one side. There's no other steps on either side of the pool. So they believe that those steps going down were the steps that the pilgrims would go down to purify their bodies before they went up to the temple. The other side of the pool was just a cistern that held water.
Yeah.
That's why there was no steps. But the steps going down was the steps that the pilgrims used to go into the water to purify the bodies. Thanks, Charlie. Just no.
It was a mikveh bath, so it was used to purify yourself before you weren't allowed to go into the temple unless you were purified.
It was the biggest mikveh baths that they've ever found in the world.
So this is where you would become ritually pure before going to the temple. And that's why the steps led straight to it.
Just stop it there. That's an artist impression where you can see the steps all the way around.
So they'll have to change that now.
Yeah.
But that's the amazing thing, is the more you discover, the more you realise
That's right.
the previous image you had was wrong.
Yeah.
Keep going with that.
So
That's the
there's
steps.
the way going up.
So you'd go up from there, and you'd go up
towards
those steps.
The temple.
There's a lot of footage of
This is
bulldozers.
one place we know that Jesus was. 3 times a year, the Jews had to visit Jerusalem 3 times a year at the 3 festivals: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. They had to come, every male had to come to Jerusalem.
Yeah, and everyone had to go through this pool if they're going to temple.
And to go up into the temple where they were heading for, they had to be ritually clean. And so we know that, and Jesus would have to do that.
There's the pathway up to the temple there.
And they used the pool to purify the bodies prior to going up.
What we're about to see as well is they've recently discovered some of the steps that led up to the temple.
Yeah.
So we should see those in a moment. They're not completely open to the public yet. The first few are. This is the start of the steps. So these are the original steps from that time. Those aren't, they're new. And that's the path that you would have took all the way up to the temple.
They said the steps were very broad. So what you can see when we get in there and have a look at them, they've only uncovered a little bit of the steps.
There we go. That's so that's someone about to go up them, but they'll show us a picture again first. Oh, there we go.
So we know that this was the way that Jesus would go up into the temple when he came to Jerusalem.
Because of course, if Jesus was going to the temple, he had to go through the
He had to go
ritual
through
bath as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So these are the steps Jesus would have walked up. And that's as far as you can go. But the person doing this decided to put the camera through.
They were a lot broader than that, the steps.
And this is a 3D recreation of what it would have looked like. Massive place. Every pilgrim had to go through there. Thank you. That's the end. That's the end of that.
Yeah. So a fascinating find that they're just rediscovering now. In the last couple of years, they've just started to do. So that's one place you can say Jesus was there. We know the miracle in John 9 took place there. We know that Jews would go there. It would be a well-populated place because Jews would be there in their thousands. Remember, Jerusalem was absolutely filled with pilgrims at these three feasts. And every one of them had to ritually be clean. And we've always wondered, haven't we?
Now, we're speculating on this one, but
On the day of Pentecost, it says 3,000 people were saved and baptized. And we've often wondered, where would you baptize 3,000 people? A few years ago, we discovered a place up
a mikveh bath near the upper room.
a mikveh bath near the upper room that was a large mikveh bath, but nothing like this. You know, it's every possibility that those 3,000 people who were baptized on the day of Pentecost were baptized in that water.
And of course, you got to wonder about, baptizing 3,000 people when you're currently wanted for being a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
It's quite a public thing. But everybody went through the mikveh baths. You could actually do it under the radar, as it were, and baptize people there without the authorities being alerted.
Yeah.
Because everybody who was going to temple went that way.
Yeah.
And of course, they met in the temple often. They were around the temple. They were at the beautiful gates. If they wanted to go to temple, this is the way they went.
Yeah. The chap who was explaining the stones, the pathway going up to the temple, there was a large stone, a smaller stone, and a large stone. And he said the reason they did that, because you couldn't run up to the temple. You had to walk slowly. And the steps were so you could put your feet on and look up. So all the time that you were looking up, you were seeing the temple in front of you as they were walking up towards it. So it must have been a magnificent sight, wasn't it? To walk up to the temple.
Yeah, it must have
to
been.
know that Jesus did that many times. So it's a fascinating find that they found.
It's amazing. And think that was only found in 2004. And it's only still getting uncovered now. There's loads of stuff around there. Well, maybe next time we'll get on some. But that whole city of David, there's loads of things being found now that they're able to dig there. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that's everything we've got for tonight. I hope it's been of interest. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it hasn't been too long. I'd like to thank everybody who's been watching as well. We'll say goodbye to everyone who is watching from home now. Hope it's been helpful to you and, has equipped you. So goodbye to everyone who is watching from home.